Hello and welcome to the Lo-Fi Weekly, a series I didn't film an episode for last week because I was busy dealing with something else. In the last episode, I discussed what I considered to be the worst of 2022. This video will now cover my 7 favorite movies from this year, from least best to best of all. As in the last video, this is all my personal opinion. Number 7. Glass Onion. When it was announced that Knives Out was getting sequels, I was excited but hesitant. What made Knives Out special was that it was something new, something fresh, a whodunit that toyed with conventions of the genre in fun and entertaining ways. And while I don't think Glass Onion is as inventive about its approach to the whodunit genre, it is nonetheless an extremely entertaining watch. The first thing I appreciated was more in a music nerd way. The first film of the series appears to be named for the Radiohead song, a theory I have based on the fact that the working title was Amnesiac, the name of the album that the song Knives Out comes from. However, the movie doesn't really take much thematically from the Radiohead song. Whereas the film is a lot about social politics and a family tearing each other apart, the song Knives Out is a little less clear and uses a lot of cannibalistic imagery. For Glass Onion, however, the main theme of the film is exactly the same as the Beatles song it's named for. The concept of something that seems layered and meaningful, but is in fact completely transparent. As a result, the mystery at the center of this movie is maybe the least entertaining part of it, but it somehow makes it noteworthy. It is extremely obvious that Miles Brun did it. The casting of Edward Norton on its own, I think, was a very deliberate, obvious hint that he was the killer. But the movie takes enough twists and turns that you can be fooled into thinking that there's more to it than that before it pulls the rug out and goes, no, it's exactly what you expected it to be. Taking the most obvious mystery of all time, but still making it gripping all the way through cannot have been an easy thing to write, but somehow Rian Johnson did it. And of course, everything else is on par with Knives Out. The character work is just as dense and intriguing, and all the relationships present drive the film forward in intriguing ways. This is of course pushed forward by the cast, who are of course fantastic in this film. I particularly want to praise Janelle Monáe as Helen Brandt, as they were tasked with playing a character playing another character for much of the runtime and executed it perfectly. And of course, Daniel Craig continues to be outrageous in the best of ways as Benoit Blanc. He's managed to cement Blanc as this generation's weird guy who solves crimes, and will find his name put down alongside Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, and Columbo for sure. I can and will watch 1,000 Blanc mystery movies. Number 6. Turning Red. I'm as surprised as you are that a Pixar movie made it this high up on my list. I haven't actively watched a Pixar film since Monsters University, I want to say, and only ended up watching this one because my friend told me it was good, and she was right. To begin with, this movie is hilarious. Director Domee Shi has an exceptional sense of visual comedy, using camera movement, what we see in frame, and even melodramatic lighting cues to underline moments in the film with an exceptional sense of timing. It's excellent work, and I don't exaggerate much when I say that her comic sense of timing is on par with Edgar Wright's comedic touch in films like Hot Fuzz or Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Yes, I know those are live action, but a lot of the visual comedy techniques she uses in this movie are equally applicable in live action. There are other fantastically memorable characters. Everyone in this movie just comes alive and is full of personality and charm. I am especially fond of the writing of the kid characters because it manages to feel so real and authentic, and I think the same applies to the era. I wasn't a teenager in Canada in 2002, so I can't speak to that, but I hear it's reasonably accurate. I did whine when this movie came out that there weren't any Avril Lavigne jokes in the movie, but the movie is set in May 2002, and Avril's first album wasn't till June of that year, so I guess I'm the asshole here. And then there's the super touching story about growing up and all the awkwardness and frustration involved in that. Now, it shouldn't be a shock when I say a Pixar movie is emotional. It's like the whole thing, but this movie made me cry. Not many movies do that, but there was a scene towards the end between Mei Lee and her mother that just, wow. Yeah, I cried for sure. So yeah, pretty big fan of this movie. Number 5. Good Night, OPPY. Speaking of movies that made me teary-eyed, this movie had me choking up about a piece of scientific equipment. The Spirit and Opportunity missions began right about the time that I became aware that I existed, so these two little rovers are a huge part of not only my childhood, but my developing love for space exploration and, consequently, my love for science fiction. However, as I became a teenager, I began to forget about these little rovers, so the first I had heard of the passing of Opportunity was the much-quoted, "My battery is low and it's getting dark." We'll come back to that momentarily. So having a documentary around that can nicely sum up their lives was awesome, because I could not only revisit the excitement that I had as a child, but also catch up on what happened to them in the meantime. And this documentary provided that in spades. It outlines the history of the mission super clearly, and in an entertaining way as well. It really helps you to see Spirit and Opportunity as almost alive, allowing you to understand how the engineers and mission technicians can be so in love with these rovers. There are a lot of really nice choices made in the presentation of this documentary. For example, Angela Bassett's narration of the mission logs adds an extra level of humanity to the rovers. The use of music is also pretty good. It's a well-known NASA tradition to play wake-up songs for their astronauts, but what I didn't know until this moment was that said wake-up songs are also played for their space probes, and that the technicians running the mission would beam their wake-up songs at Spirit and Opportunity as a sort of sentimental exercise. The documentary relays this knowledge extremely well, using the songs to enhance the mood of what is happening in that moment. The use of I'll Be Seeing You by Billie Holiday at the end of the film as Opportunity is declared dead, as that was the last data broadcast to the rover, was particularly moving. However, if there's one part of this doco I'm a little on the fence on, it's the dialogue boxes that pop up from time to time from the rovers. See, their function in the documentary is to sort of translate the code the rovers sent back to NASA so we can understand what's happening on Mars. In concept, I like this idea. It's fun. But the documentary doesn't really communicate that it's just an approximation of the code and not a verbatim quote, so this documentary ends up contributing to the half-truth that Opportunity's last transmission was the literal sentence, "My battery is low and it's getting dark." It is a sweet sentiment, and one that sucker punches me every time, but when this is, a documentary, it can come off as a little misleading. All in all though, if you're a fan of space exploration, I highly recommend this documentary. Number 4. After Yang. This is a release from this year that went tragically, criminally unnoticed. For shame, everyone. For shame. I actually nearly wrote a quick review for this one, but I didn't feel like I had anything interesting to say about it at the time, so I just moved on. In short, After Yang is the story of a family learning to cope after their live-in robot friend very suddenly dies on them. It unpacks the family's relationships to the robot as they look through Yang's memories, realizing that he had a life and a soul of his own. Now, this movie is very, very quiet and very slowly paced. This might have put me off if I'd gone into it blind, but I was already familiar with the director's approach to filmmaking, so I was ready for it going in. I'm pretty fond of Kogonada's debut film Columbus, and was very excited to see his take on sci-fi, and it didn't disappoint. For a start, he uses the ideas of imperfect memory to drive home the concept of what it means to be alive, but in different ways for the humans and for Yang. For the humans, the memories are shown in an unconventional manner, with several takes of the same conversations playing in between each other, some lines being heard twice in a row with slightly different readings, or blocking slightly changing between cuts. This creates a fascinating feeling of looking into what human memory really looks like. Messy, largely unreliable, and more centered on the emotions of a memory than what precisely happened. In Yang's case, it's established that he saves specific 1-second clips once a day, memories that he wanted to be saved. These short clips are then used to explore what it was that Yang deemed important enough to save forever, and through that we come to understand that he does have a soul. Beyond all that though, this movie is very moving. Again, I had expected this, as Kogonada's Columbus was also a pretty emotional film, but the depiction of the family's grief for Yang, as well as the melancholia attached to their exploration of the love Yang had for a woman named Ada, was powerful stuff. All in all, if you've not watched this movie, I seriously highly recommend it. Number 3, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I mean, yeah, this movie's pretty incredible. Now, I will admit not everything in the movie works for me. There were a handful of jokes that landed just on the other side of obnoxious for me, the dildo fight scene being one of them. But beyond that, this movie is just fantastic. There are far more qualified and intelligent people out there who can pull this movie apart for all the wonderful things that it does, and since I haven't seen it since it came out, I can't do much off the top of my head, but I will say this is another movie that made me very, very emotional. The breakdown of generational trauma on its own was tear-jerking, but specifically the relationship between Evelyn and Joy was utterly crushing to watch. The fact that this movie's insanity actually aids the emotional through line is also something I don't think I've seen much of before. The seemingly non-sequitur nature of the movie sort of works as an abstract representation of the messiness of this mother-daughter relationship, which makes these moments that could come across as random land emotionally. When I went into this movie, I did not expect a scene with 2 rocks to make me all choked up. But here we are. Now, of course, the Daniels' direction in this film is outstanding. Managing to hold this movie together despite the constant non-sequitur moments is a feat to behold for sure. But for me, the absolute standout of this film is the acting. Michelle Yeoh, Ke Huy Quan, and Stephanie Hsu all turn in some of the best performances I've ever seen, especially Quan and Hsu. Their performances as Waymond and Joy elevate the movie from really good to just brilliance. Again, I will need to watch this movie again to have a more in-depth discussion of everything that this movie does, but for now, it's brilliantly directed and brilliantly acted. You have to see it if you haven't already. Number 2, The Batman. Okay, look, I know that technically Everything Everywhere is the better movie here, but I'm a comic dork, so here we are, I guess. The Batman is a pretty damn good movie though. Ever since the first trailer, I had been eagerly awaiting this movie, and when I'd finally seen it, it was everything I wanted it to be and more. I already have a quick review of this movie up somewhere, so I'll keep this one briefer, but in short, the atmosphere of this movie is incredible. What I find has been lacking in Batman movies since Batman Begins is a sense of atmosphere around Gotham. It could just be any other city for the most part, but this movie finally brings Gotham back its personality. Sure, now it has a major case of Los Angeles and Blade Runner reign, but that and the frequently gothic and oppressive production design makes the city feel gloomy but alive at the same time. The atmosphere is also aided by the runtime, as every scene in the movie is allowed to breathe, allowing us to sit within Gotham and its atmosphere. This movie is also gripping from start to finish. I was a little concerned when I saw the 3-hour runtime, but this movie uses every second of it perfectly, and is endlessly rewatchable. I saw it twice inside a week at theaters, a rarity for me. And now, the number 1 movie for 2022 for me is Nope. Nope? More like yep, am I right? Okay, having gotten that joke out of my system, let's actually talk about the movie. Jordan Peele is a master of his craft. This is common knowledge, I think, but I think this has to be his best film yet. I have intentions on a full video about Nope one day once I know how to approach it, so I won't say too much here, but I would like to sing its praises for a minute. For a start, this movie's approach to the UFO movie is fascinating. Taking a genre that has been done to death and flipping it on its head by changing one small detail about the setup makes for an entirely new experience, and one that plays out less like a UFO movie like Close Encounters and more like a space horror version of Jaws. It's pretty awesome. Speaking of horror, holy shit is this movie terrifying. I saw this movie in IMAX, and there were several sequences that haunted me, and one that triggered the most intense fight or flight feeling I've ever had in a movie in my life. If you've seen it, you probably know what scene I'm talking about. And of course, everyone is brilliant in this movie. Daniel Kaluuya and Keke Palmer do some of the best sibling acting I've ever seen. Like, the illusion is never broken. They genuinely felt like brother and sister. Steven Yeun is also super impressive in this movie. His performance as the very broken dupe is subtle but incredibly potent. And I could go on for hours about how rich this movie is thematically, how beautiful the cinematography is and how innovative it is in places, how incredible the score is, how great everything is, but I want to save some of that energy for a full-length video on the film, so I will save it for then. But for now, I will declare it as my favorite film of 2022 by a gigantic margin. What a film. And if you haven't seen it, do it.
I don't know that.
I don't remember asking you, Alexa. So that's my top 7 for 2022. Tune in next week for a couple of movies from 2022 that you may have missed that I didn't mention in this or the last episode of the Lo-Fi Weekly.